The first time it happened, I was 17 years old, frozen in my bed, unable to scream while a shadow figure stood in the corner of my room. For the next 23 years, I lived in terror of falling asleep. Doctors called it sleep paralysis. Sleep clinics gave me medications. Therapists told me it was just my brain misfiring during REM sleep. But they were all wrong. What I experienced wasn't a neurological glitch. It was something far more profound, something that would eventually lead me to understand a hidden reality that exists between waking and sleeping, between our dimension and others. And when I finally met the visitor who could explain what was really happening, everything I thought I knew about consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence itself completely shattered. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to listen with an open mind. Because what I'm about to share will challenge everything sleep science has told you. It will make you question whether those terrifying episodes you or someone you know has experienced are really just brain chemistry gone wrong, or something far more significant. If you've ever experienced sleep paralysis, if you've ever felt that crushing weight on your chest, seen those shadowy figures, heard those impossible voices, then what I'm about to reveal will change how you understand those experiences forever. And if you've never experienced it, consider yourself fortunate, but also understand that you're missing a key piece of understanding about the nature of human consciousness. Turn on notifications, because this journey into the in-between will take us places that conventional science refuses to acknowledge. Places where consciousness doesn't end when your body falls asleep. Places where other intelligences observe, interact, and sometimes, very rarely, choose to communicate. Now, let me tell you how I discovered the truth about sleep paralysis, and how that truth led me to understand something far bigger than I ever imagined possible. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and my first episode of sleep paralysis happened on a humid summer night in Portland, Oregon. I was 17, home alone while my parents attended my grandmother's birthday celebration 3 hours away. I'd chosen to stay behind, claiming I had to work my shift at the local coffee shop the next morning. The truth was, I just wanted the house to myself for once. I went to bed around 11:30, exhausted from a double shift. I remember falling asleep easily, sinking into that comfortable darkness that usually meant a peaceful night. But sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up. Or at least, I thought I woke up. My eyes opened to my familiar bedroom, the moonlight streaming through my window creating the same patterns on my ceiling that I'd seen 1,000 times before. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. Except for one horrifying detail, I couldn't move. Not even slightly. Not a finger, not a toe. Not even my eyes beyond the limited range they could see from their fixed position. My body was completely paralyzed, as if someone had severed the connection between my brain and my muscles. Panic exploded in my chest. I tried to scream, but my vocal cords wouldn't respond. I tried to thrash, to kick, to do anything, but my body simply refused to obey. And that's when I saw it. In the corner of my room, near my closet door, a shadow that was darker than the surrounding darkness. It had a vaguely human shape, tall, maybe 7 feet, but its edges were indistinct, blurry, as if it existed slightly out of phase with reality. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was watching me. The terror was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was primal, visceral, the kind of fear that reaches back through millions of years of evolution. The fear a prey animal feels when it realizes a predator has it cornered. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. My breath came in shallow, rapid gasps, the only part of my body I could still partially control. The shadow figure didn't move. It just stood there, observing. And somehow, I could feel its attention on me, like a physical weight pressing down. Minutes passed, or maybe it was only seconds. Time had become meaningless in this frozen nightmare. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The paralysis released. I could move again. I bolted upright, gasping, my entire body drenched in sweat. I grabbed my phone, turned on every light in the room, and spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner, too terrified to close my eyes. When my parents came home the next morning, I tried to explain what had happened. My mother, ever practical, suggested I'd had a nightmare. My father, who worked as an engineer, explained it away as probably just sleep paralysis, a common phenomenon where the brain wakes up before it disengages the natural paralysis that prevents us from acting out our dreams. Their explanations should have been comforting. But they weren't. Because both of them completely dismissed the most important detail. The shadow figure had been real. I wasn't just imagining it. I had seen it, felt it, known it was there with the same certainty I knew the sun would rise in the morning. But I was 17, and adults always seemed so sure of their scientific explanations. So I pushed the experience down, tried to forget about it, told myself they must be right. It was just my brain playing tricks. Just a glitch in my sleep cycle. Nothing more. I was wrong. And that first episode was just the beginning. Over the next 5 years, the episodes became more frequent. At first, they happened maybe once every few months, always following the same pattern. Sudden paralysis, overwhelming terror, and the presence of something watching from the shadows. I learned all the scientific explanations. I read every article about sleep paralysis I could find. The medical consensus was clear. Sleep paralysis occurs when your conscious mind wakes up during REM sleep, but your body remains in the natural paralyzed state that prevents you from acting out your dreams. The hallucinations, the sense of presence, the feeling of something pressing on your chest, all of these were explained as the brain's attempt to make sense of the conflicting signals it was receiving. Fear response amplified by the inability to move. Pattern recognition gone haywire in the dark. Hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations caused by the overlap of sleep and wakefulness. I wanted to believe these explanations. I really did. They were rational, scientific, comforting in their certainty. But there was always something they couldn't explain. The consistency. The shadow figures I saw weren't random chaotic dream imagery. They were always the same basic form, tall, humanoid, watching. And more disturbing, as I connected with other sleep paralysis sufferers through online forums, I discovered that thousands of people around the world were seeing the exact same thing. Different cultures, different backgrounds, different sleep environments, but the same shadow figures. The same sense of malevolent presence. The same feeling of being observed by something non-human. How could that be explained by random neural misfiring? How could people who had never met, never discussed their experiences, all independently hallucinate the same specific entities? The scientific community had answers for that too. They pointed to cultural contamination, the idea that we'd all been exposed to similar imagery in movies, books, and folklore. They explained it as archetypal imagery from our collective unconscious, patterns hardwired into human neurology. They dismissed the consistency as confirmation bias, people remembering the similarities and forgetting the differences. But I knew there was more to it. And by the time I turned 22, the episodes had become so frequent, sometimes multiple times per week, that I could no longer function normally. I was terrified to fall asleep. I'd stay awake for days, fueled by caffeine and desperation, until my body would finally force me into unconsciousness. And then it would happen again. The paralysis. The presence. The terror. I went to sleep specialists. They hooked me up to machines, monitored my brainwaves, tracked my sleep cycles. They confirmed what I already knew. I was experiencing sleep paralysis. They prescribed medications to regulate my sleep patterns, antidepressants to reduce the frequency of REM sleep, sleeping pills to knock me out so completely that I wouldn't experience the awakening during paralysis phenomenon. Nothing worked. The episodes continued. And with each one, I became more convinced that the medical establishment was missing something fundamental. They were treating the symptoms while completely ignoring the real cause. They were so committed to their materialist paradigm, the belief that consciousness is nothing more than brain activity, that they couldn't even consider the possibility that something else might be happening. By the time I turned 25, I'd lost my job due to chronic exhaustion. My relationships had fallen apart because no one wanted to deal with my constant anxiety and sleep deprivation. I'd tried everything conventional medicine had to offer, and nothing had helped. I was at the end of my rope, seriously considering whether a life lived in constant terror of sleep was worth living at all. And that's when everything changed. That's when I met Marcus. I met Marcus Chen at a support group for people with chronic sleep disorders. It was my therapist's suggestion, a last-ditch attempt to connect me with others who might understand what I was going through. The group met every Thursday evening in the basement of a community center, a circle of exhausted, desperate people sharing their struggles with insomnia, narcolepsy, sleep apnea, and yes, sleep paralysis. Marcus was in his late 40s, a former neuroscience researcher who had left academia under circumstances he initially didn't want to discuss. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm demeanor that seemed out of place among our collective anxiety. He rarely spoke during the group sessions, mostly just listening with intense attention to everyone else's stories. After my third session, as I was leaving, Marcus approached me in the parking lot. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, "I've been listening to your descriptions of your sleep paralysis episodes. Would you be willing to talk with me privately? I think I might be able to offer you a different perspective." Something in his tone, a mixture of seriousness and genuine compassion, made me agree. We met the following Saturday at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Portland. For the first hour, Marcus just asked me questions. Not the standard medical questions about sleep hygiene and stress levels, but detailed, specific questions about the shadow figures. What exactly did they look like? Did they ever move? Did I ever sense any intention from them? Had I ever tried to communicate? That last question stopped me cold. Communicate? Marcus, these are hallucinations. You can't communicate with a hallucination. Marcus smiled, but there was sadness in it. That's what they teach us. That's what I believed for 20 years of my career. But Sarah, what if the scientific community is wrong? What if sleep paralysis isn't a glitch at all, but rather a moment when consciousness temporarily exists in two states simultaneously? "I don't understand what you mean," I said, though a part of me felt a strange flutter of recognition, as if something deep inside already knew what he was about to explain. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sleep paralysis occurs at the boundary between waking and sleeping, between our normal conscious state and the dream state. What the scientific establishment won't acknowledge is that these states aren't just different levels of brain activity. They're different frequencies of consciousness. And at that boundary, at that threshold, you're momentarily existing in what I call the in-between. A state where you can perceive things that exist outside our normal physical reality." I felt my skepticism rising, but I forced myself to listen. After years of failed treatments, what did I have to lose? "The shadow figures you're seeing," Marcus continued, "they're not hallucinations. They're real entities that exist in dimensional spaces adjacent to our own. Most of the time, they can't perceive us and we can't perceive them. But during sleep paralysis, when your consciousness is operating at that threshold frequency, the veil becomes thin enough for mutual perception to occur." "That's insane," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a series of images, sketches and descriptions from cultures all over the world, spanning thousands of years. The medieval old hag, the Newfoundland hag, the Japanese kanashibari, the Thai Fayam, the Turkish karabasan, the Vietnamese Mada. Every culture had a name for it, and every description was remarkably similar. Paralysis, a sense of presence, shadowy figures, overwhelming terror. This isn't just a neurological phenomenon that happens to coincidentally produce similar hallucinations across all of human history, Marcus said. This is consistent documentation of the same real experience, interpreted through different cultural lenses. The medical establishment explains away the consistency. I think the consistency is the proof that something real is happening. I wanted to argue, to defend the rational scientific worldview I'd clung to for so long. But I couldn't, because deep down, I'd always known. The experiences were too real, too consistent, too specific to be mere brain chemistry gone wrong. "Okay," I said slowly. "Let's say you're right. Let's say these things are real. What are they? What do they want?" Marcus's expression grew more serious. "That's the complicated part. There are many different types of entities that can manifest during the in-between state. Most are simply observers, watchers from adjacent dimensions who are as curious about us as we would be about them if we could perceive them. They're not malevolent, just profoundly other. But there are some that feed on fear, that actively cultivate terror in humans because our emotional energy at that heightened state is nourishment to them. You're telling me there are interdimensional parasites feeding on human fear. Despite the absurdity of the statement, I felt truth in it, a recognition that made my skin prickle. Some of them, yes. But Sarah, here's what's important. You're not powerless. The terror you feel during sleep paralysis, that overwhelming sense of helplessness, that's partially their influence, but it's also partially self-generated. You've been conditioned by repeated experiences to expect terror, and so you create it. Fear is their food source, but it's also your defense mechanism. And it's the defense mechanism that's actually making things worse. So what am I supposed to do? Just not be afraid when I'm paralyzed with a shadow demon standing over me. Marcus smiled. Not exactly, but close. I can teach you techniques, ways to shift your consciousness during these episodes. Ways to communicate, to understand, and ultimately, to choose whether you want these experiences to continue or not. I stared at him, desperately wanting to believe but also terrified of the implications. Why are you telling me this? Why do you know all this? For a long moment, Marcus was silent. Then he said, because 15 years ago, I had a series of sleep paralysis episodes that became so intense, so frequent, that I nearly lost my mind. And at my lowest point, someone found me, someone not human, and taught me what I'm offering to teach you. My entire worldview shattered. I lost my position at the university when I tried to publish my findings. They called me delusional, said I'd had a psychotic break. But I know what I experienced. I know what I learned. And I've spent the last decade helping others who are ready to understand. And if I say yes, if I want to learn, then your sleep paralysis will never be the same. You'll understand what's really happening. You'll meet the visitors face to face, consciously, with full awareness. And you'll discover that consciousness is far more vast, far more strange, and far more magnificent than anything our current science can explain. I took a deep breath. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was nonsense, that Marcus was either delusional or trying to pull me into some kind of cult. But the part of me that had spent years in terror, the part that had never believed the medical explanations, the part that knew something more was happening, that part was desperate for answers. Teach me, I said. The training Marcus provided wasn't what I expected. There were no mystical rituals, no occult practices, no New Age mumbo-jumbo. Instead, it was intensely practical, a systematic approach to shifting consciousness that combined elements of meditation, lucid dreaming techniques, and what Marcus called threshold awareness. The key, Marcus explained during our first training session at his home, a modest house filled with books on neuroscience, consciousness studies, and comparative mythology, is understanding that consciousness isn't produced by your brain. Your brain is a receiver and processor of consciousness, like a radio receiving signals. During normal waking consciousness, you're tuned to one specific frequency, the frequency of physical reality. During deep sleep, you're tuned to entirely different frequencies, what we experience as dreams. But during sleep paralysis, you're stuck between frequencies, picking up signals from multiple channels simultaneously. He showed me how to meditate in specific ways, not the typical mindfulness meditation aimed at achieving peace and presence, but a focused technique designed to practice consciously shifting between different states of awareness. You need to learn to recognize the feeling of different consciousness states, he said. The quality of awareness you have when you're fully awake is different from the quality when you're drowsy, which is different from the quality during dreams, which is different from the quality during sleep paralysis. Most people move through these states unconsciously. You're going to learn to navigate them deliberately. For weeks, I practiced. Every night before bed, I'd spend 30 minutes in meditation, learning to recognize the subtle shift that occurred as my consciousness began to move towards sleep. Marcus taught me to identify the moment, that split second when your consciousness begins to disengage from your physical senses, when you start to drift. That moment is the doorway, he explained. In normal sleep, you drift through it unconsciously. During sleep paralysis, you get stuck in it. You're going to learn to pause there, to remain conscious while your body falls asleep. It was harder than anything I'd ever attempted. The natural tendency when you feel yourself falling asleep is to either fight it and stay awake, or surrender and lose consciousness. To do neither, to maintain awareness while allowing the body to sleep, required a level of focus and balance I'd never developed. But slowly, over weeks of practice, I began to get it. I learned to recognize the sensation of my body entering sleep paralysis deliberately, the tingling feeling as the natural paralysis engaged, the slight shift in the quality of perception. And Marcus taught me the crucial skill, how to remain calm. Fear is the enemy, he repeated constantly. When you feel the paralysis engage, when you sense the presence of something else, your conditioned response is terror. That terror spikes your adrenaline, which pulls you back toward waking consciousness, which creates the horrible stuck-in between feeling that makes sleep paralysis so traumatic. But if you can remain calm, if you can accept the paralysis without fear, everything changes. He taught me breathing techniques, ways to keep my physiological fear response under control even when experiencing something that my primal brain interpreted as life-threatening. He taught me visualization methods, ways to create a sense of safety and protection around myself. And most importantly, he taught me how to set intention. Before you fall asleep, Marcus instructed, you need to set clear intention for what you want to happen during sleep paralysis. Not asking, not hoping, but declaring. I choose to remain conscious. I choose to perceive clearly. I choose to communicate. Intention is the steering wheel of consciousness. Where you point it, you go. 3 months into training, I had my first consciously controlled sleep paralysis episode. I felt it coming, that familiar sensation of waking while my body remained asleep. But this time, instead of panic, I breathed slowly and steadily. I acknowledged the paralysis without fighting it. I noticed the shadow figure materializing in the corner of my room. And instead of terror, I felt curiosity. I focused my intention, exactly as Marcus had taught me, I see you. I'm not afraid. If you wish to communicate, I'm listening. What happened next was the moment everything changed. The shadow figure moved. For the first time in hundreds of sleep paralysis episodes, the entity didn't just stand there. It moved toward my bed, slowly, deliberately. And instead of my usual terror, I felt intense curiosity mixed with awe. As it approached, something extraordinary happened. The figure began to solidify, to gain definition. It wasn't becoming physical exactly, but it was becoming clearer, more distinct. I could make out features now, a tall, impossibly thin form, with limbs that were too long, proportions that were subtly wrong in ways that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. And then, I heard it. Not with my ears, there was no physical sound. But inside my mind, a presence, a communication that wasn't exactly language but was immediately comprehensible. Finally, you perceive clearly now. The voice, if it could be called that, was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It simply was, conveying meaning directly without the need for words as a medium. What are you? I thought back, discovering that I could communicate the same way. A watcher, an observer from the adjacent. We have many names in your languages, none quite accurate. I mean you no harm. I never have, though I understand my presence caused you distress. Why? Why do you watch? Because you are fascinating. Your species exists simultaneously in multiple states, physical and energetic, conscious and unconscious, bound by time yet dreaming outside it. During most of your waking hours, you are locked into a single narrow frequency of perception. You cannot perceive the vast reality that surrounds you. But during the in-between, during the threshold states, some of you become briefly visible to us, as we become visible to you. I struggled to process this information. So sleep paralysis, it's not a medical condition. It is both. Your scientists correctly observe the neurological mechanisms, the REM sleep, the motor inhibition, the activation of fear centers in the brain. But they mistake the mechanism for the entirety of the phenomenon. They are like people who study a radio's circuitry and conclude that the music originates from the wires and transistors. They cannot conceive that the radio is receiving something broadcast from elsewhere. Then what is it really? What's actually happening? Your consciousness is multidimensional, though you typically only perceive one dimension, the physical. During sleep, your consciousness shifts to other frequencies, what you experience as dreams. Sleep paralysis occurs when your physical consciousness wakes, but your energetic consciousness is still operating at the threshold frequency. At that frequency, you can briefly perceive entities and dimensions that exist adjacent to your physical reality. The shadow figure, or rather the watcher as it had called itself, moved closer. I could feel its attention on me, but it no longer felt malevolent. It felt curious, even gentle. Most of your kind, when they experience the in-between, respond with primal terror. This is understandable. Your survival instincts interpret our presence as threat. But this terror feeds certain other entities that dwell in the lower frequencies, predatory beings that cultivate fear for sustenance. The more frightened you become, the more you attract them, and the worse your experiences become. It is a vicious cycle. The sleep paralysis demons, I thought. Those are real too. Different class of entity. We watchers observe. We study. We mean no harm. But yes, there are others that feed on fear, on pain, on the energy that humans emit during intense negative emotional states. They are attracted to the in-between because that is where humans are most vulnerable, most intensely fearful, and therefore most nourishing. A chill ran through me, despite my conscious effort to remain calm. How do I protect myself from them? By understanding that fear is the invitation. When you experience the in-between with terror, you broadcast that frequency powerfully. The fear feeders are drawn to it as your kind is drawn to the scent of food. But when you experience the in-between with calm awareness, with curiosity rather than fear, you do not broadcast that frequency. You become invisible to them, inedible. So Marcus was right. The fear is what makes it worse. Your friend Marcus is one of the few of your kind who has truly understood. He learned through great suffering, as most who truly learn do. He has been teaching others, preparing them. This pleases us. Humanity is approaching a threshold, a collective shift in consciousness. More and more of you are experiencing the in-between. Those who learn to navigate it consciously will help guide those who remain trapped in fear. I felt overwhelmed by the implications. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because you asked. Because you prepared yourself through discipline and courage to perceive clearly. Because you are ready to understand. And because we need communicators, humans who can consciously bridge the in-between, who can help translate these truths into forms your species can comprehend. I don't understand. Translate for who? Why does it matter if humans understand this? The watcher was silent for a moment, and I felt something shift in the quality of its presence, as if it was considering how to explain something complex. Your species stands at a crucial juncture. For millennia, you have been developing technologically while remaining largely unconscious of your true multidimensional nature. You have built a civilization based on materialist assumptions, the belief that consciousness is a byproduct of matter, that you are biological machines that cease to exist when the machine stops functioning. This belief system has served a purpose. It has allowed you to develop science and technology. But it has also created profound suffering, existential meaninglessness, disconnection from the larger reality of which you are a part. The watcher moved around my bed, and I found I could track its movement with my awareness, even though my physical eyes remained fixed. You are approaching a technological singularity, a point where your machines may achieve artificial consciousness. But simultaneously, some of you are achieving a consciousness singularity, awakening to your true multidimensional nature. Sleep paralysis, threshold experiences, near-death experiences, psychedelic states, all of these are increasing in frequency. They are not accidents or pathologies. They are cracks in the materialist paradigm, opportunities for expansion of awareness. So what am I supposed to do with this information? Live it. Integrate it. Share it when you encounter others who are ready. You cannot convince the skeptics, nor should you try. But those who have experienced the in-between, those who know something more is happening, they will find you. They will recognize truth when they hear it. And each person who learns to navigate the in-between consciously makes it easier for the next person. I felt my consciousness beginning to shift, the sleep paralysis starting to naturally release as my body moved toward either deeper sleep or waking. Wait, I thought urgently. Will I see you again? Can I learn more? You will see me when you consciously enter the in-between. I will continue to observe, and now that you perceive clearly, we can continue to communicate. But Sarah, understand this. I am just one entity among countless beings that exist in the dimensions adjacent to yours. Some are benevolent, some are neutral, some are hostile. Learn to discern between them. Learn to protect your consciousness. And above all, learn to navigate without fear. Fear is the greatest danger in the in-between, far more than any entity you might encounter. The paralysis released. I woke fully, my body suddenly mobile again. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, but not from terror. From excitement, from wonder, from the absolute certainty that what I had just experienced was real. I grabbed my phone and immediately texted Marcus. It happened. I made contact. We need to talk. His response came within minutes. I know. I felt the shift in your consciousness pattern. Come to my house tomorrow. There's much more to teach you now that you've begun. I lay back down, knowing I wouldn't sleep more that night. My mind raced with implications, with questions, with the staggering realization that everything I thought I knew about reality was incomplete. Sleep paralysis wasn't a medical condition to be cured. It was a doorway to be consciously entered. And I had just taken my first steps through it. Over the following months, my relationship with sleep paralysis transformed completely. What had once been my greatest fear became my gateway to extraordinary experiences and profound understanding. With Marcus's continued guidance, I learned to enter the in-between state deliberately, not waiting for it to happen randomly, but inducing it through focused meditation and consciousness techniques. The Watcher continued to appear during many of my threshold experiences, and through our communications, I began to understand the true nature of reality in ways that scientific materialism could never explain. Your physical world, the Watcher explained during one session, is one frequency among infinite frequencies. Imagine a vast radio spectrum, and your physical reality is one station. You are so accustomed to being tuned to this one station that you believe it is the only station that exists. But consciousness is the dial. When you shift consciousness, you shift frequencies, and you begin to perceive other stations, other realities that exist simultaneously with your physical world. I asked about the mechanics of this. How exactly did consciousness work? What was it made of? Consciousness is not made of anything, the Watcher responded. It is the fundamental substrate from which everything else emerges. Your scientists search for consciousness in the brain, studying neurons and synapses, believing that if they map the connections precisely enough, they will find consciousness. But this is like trying to find the music by dissecting the radio. Consciousness uses the brain, operates through the brain, but does not originate from the brain. Then where does it originate? It does not originate. It is. Consciousness is the ground of all being, the field from which physical reality, energetic reality, and all other realities manifest. Your individual consciousness is a localized expression of universal consciousness, like a wave is a localized expression of the ocean. You feel separate, but separation is illusion. You are always connected to the whole. You simply forget this connection while focused on physical experience. These conversations challenged everything I'd been taught, yet they resonated with something deep inside me, a knowing that had always been there, buried under years of conditioning. Marcus, during our regular meetings, helped me integrate these experiences into a coherent framework. What you're learning, he said, has been taught by mystics and shamans for thousands of years. The language is different, the cultural context varies, but the core truth is the same. Consciousness is primary, matter is secondary. You are not a body that has consciousness. You are consciousness that has taken temporary form in a body. But why? I asked. Why would consciousness limit itself to physical form if it's really infinite and unlimited? Marcus smiled. Why does an actor take on different roles? Why does a dreamer create different dreams? Experience, growth, exploration. Your physical lifetime is consciousness exploring itself through the limitations and challenges of material existence. And threshold states like sleep paralysis are moments when you briefly remember what you really are. As my understanding deepened, I also learned about the other entities that inhabited the in-between. Not all were as benevolent as the Watcher. I encountered fear-feeders, entities that appeared as grotesque, nightmarish forms and attempted to provoke terror. But armed with knowledge and practice, I learned to recognize them for what they were and to maintain calm awareness even in their presence. The key, I discovered, was understanding that they had no power except what I gave them through my fear response. They were predators, yes, but predators that fed on emotional energy, not physical bodies. Without the fear, they couldn't touch me. With calm observation, they would eventually lose interest and drift away. I also encountered other human consciousnesses in the in-between, people who were experiencing sleep paralysis or lucid dreams, their consciousness temporarily visible to mine as we both operated at the threshold frequency. Some were terrified, trapped in their own fear responses. When I could, I tried to project calmness toward them, to communicate as the Watcher had communicated with me, though most were too panicked to perceive clearly. But occasionally, I'd encounter someone who had also learned to navigate consciously. These meetings were profound, shared experiences of consciousness beyond the physical. Moments of recognition that we were all part of something far larger than our individual physical lives. Marcus explained that this was becoming more common. The frequency of threshold experiences is increasing across humanity. More people are having sleep paralysis, more are having spontaneous mystical experiences, more are questioning the materialist worldview. It's as if consciousness itself is pushing for expansion, preparing humanity for the next stage of evolution. What stage is that? I asked. Conscious multidimensionality. Your species has been unconsciously multidimensional since you evolved consciousness. You dream, you experience intuition. You have moments of inspiration and creativity that seem to come from nowhere. But you've done all of this unconsciously, dismissing it as mere brain activity. The next stage is learning to consciously navigate the multidimensional nature of your existence. To deliberately shift between frequencies. To integrate your physical and non-physical aspects into unified awareness. And sleep paralysis is part of that evolution. Sleep paralysis is one of the cracks in the old paradigm. It's an experience that absolutely should not happen if the materialist model of consciousness is correct. If you're just a brain, if consciousness is just neurons firing, then why would evolution create a state where you can be awake and paralyzed while experiencing entities that shouldn't exist? The existence of sleep paralysis itself is evidence that the standard model is incomplete. About 6 months into my training, the Watcher revealed something that reframed everything I'd learned. We were in the in-between, me consciously experiencing sleep paralysis while maintaining calm awareness, the Watcher's presence clear and defined as it had become through our repeated interactions. Sarah, there is something you must understand about why beings like myself observe your species. I thought you said we were interesting, that you were curious about us. That is true, but incomplete. We observe because we are invested in your development. Your species is young, tremendously young by cosmic standards. You have existed as technological beings for barely a century, and as conscious beings for only hundreds of thousands of years. In the vast scope of existence, you are children. That's not very flattering. I felt what might have been amusement from the Watcher. It is not meant as insult. It is simply fact. But you are children with extraordinary potential. You exist in a unique position, conscious enough to question your existence, yet still deeply connected to the physical realm. You bridge matter and consciousness in ways that many older species have lost. What do you mean lost? As consciousness evolves, as beings become more aware of their multidimensional nature, they often become less connected to physical reality. They ascend, as some of your spiritual traditions describe it. They move permanently to higher frequencies. But in doing so, they lose something valuable, the visceral intensity of physical experience, the raw creativity that comes from working with the limitations of matter. The watcher moved closer, and I could feel its attention intensely focused. Your species stands at a threshold. You can continue on your current path, developing technology while remaining unconscious of your true nature. This path leads to existential crisis, to the potential destruction of your world through weapons and environmental damage born of disconnection. Or you can evolve consciously, integrating your technological development with spiritual understanding, becoming a species that consciously operates across multiple dimensions while remaining grounded in physical reality. And beings like you, you're trying to help us choose the second path. We cannot choose for you. Free will is absolute. But we can observe, we can communicate with those who are ready to perceive us, and we can share understanding. Every human who learns to consciously navigate the in-between, who learns that consciousness is not limited to physical reality, becomes a seed point for further expansion. You tell others. They have their own experiences. Slowly, the collective consciousness of your species shifts. So sleep paralysis, threshold experiences, all of these are designed to wake us up. Not designed, that implies deliberate engineering. But they are opportunities, cracks in the materialist paradigm that allow light to enter. Those who experience these states can either be traumatized by them, which is sadly common, or they can be awakened by them. The difference lies in whether they have the knowledge and support to understand what is happening. That's why Marcus teaches. That's why you wanted me to learn. Yes, Marcus is one of many humans who have awakened to this truth and chosen to help others. You are now becoming another. There will be more. And as more humans understand the true nature of consciousness, the collective fear around threshold experiences will diminish. Sleep paralysis will be understood not as a medical pathology but as a doorway to expanded awareness. I processed this, feeling the weight of responsibility but also excitement. What should I do? How should I help? Live consciously. Integrate what you've learned. And when you encounter others who are suffering from sleep paralysis or other threshold experiences, share what you know. Not by preaching, not by trying to convert skeptics, but by offering understanding to those who are ready to receive it. You will know who is ready. They will ask the right questions. They will have the same knowing you had, the sense that something more is happening than medical science can explain. And the fear feeders? The hostile entities? Do I warn people about them? Teach discernment. Teach that not all entities are beneficial, but also teach that fear is what gives them power. The aware consciousness, the calm consciousness, cannot be harmed in the in-between. Physical reality is where you can be physically harmed. But in the threshold states, in the dimensions of consciousness, your awareness is your protection. Fear makes you vulnerable. Understanding makes you sovereign. Over the remaining months of that year, I took the Watcher's guidance to heart. I began writing about my experiences, not in academic papers that would be dismissed by mainstream science, but in accessible articles and blog posts aimed at people who were suffering from sleep paralysis and searching for understanding beyond the standard medical explanation. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out, sharing their own experiences, their own encounters with shadow figures and entities during paralysis. Many had been dismissed by doctors, told they were just hallucinating, given medications that didn't help. They were desperate for someone who understood that what they were experiencing was real. I connected them with Marcus and others like him, people who had learned to navigate the in-between consciously and were willing to teach. We formed a loose network, not an organization exactly, but a community of individuals who understood the truth about consciousness and threshold states. Not everyone was ready to accept this understanding. Many preferred the comfort of medical explanations, even if those explanations didn't actually help their condition. And that was okay. As the Watcher had said, we couldn't convince anyone who wasn't ready. But for those who were ready, who had the same knowing I'd had, the information was life-changing. People learned to transform their relationship with sleep paralysis. Instead of dreading sleep, they began to see it as an opportunity. Instead of being traumatized by the presence of entities, they learned to observe them with curiosity and discernment. And most importantly, They learned that they were not powerless victims of a brain malfunction, but conscious beings capable of navigating multiple dimensions of reality. Of course, not everyone was supportive of this work. When I attempted to publish some of my findings in mainstream journals, I encountered the same resistance Marcus had faced years before. Peer reviewers dismissed the experiences as anecdotal, the interpretations as unfalsifiable pseudoscience. They demanded double-blind controlled studies, measurable physiological markers, replicable experimental results. But how do you design a double-blind study for consciousness communication with interdimensional entities? How do you measure something that occurs outside physical space-time? The very tools of materialist science were inadequate for studying phenomena that occurred in the realm of consciousness itself. I had a particularly heated exchange with Dr. Richard Holloway, a prominent sleep researcher and staunch materialist, at a conference on sleep disorders. I'd been invited to present as part of a panel on alternative perspectives on sleep paralysis, much to Dr. Holloway's apparent displeasure. "Ms. Mitchell," he said during the Q&A period, his tone dripping with condescension, "you're claiming that sleep paralysis is not a neurological phenomenon but rather some kind of psychic experience involving communication with entities from other dimensions. Do you have any evidence for this that doesn't rely solely on subjective reports?" "Dr. Holloway," I replied calmly, "I'm not denying the neurological mechanisms you've documented. The REM intrusion, the motor paralysis, the activation of the amygdala, all of that is real. What I'm saying is that these mechanisms are not the entire picture. They are the hardware, but they don't explain the consistency of the experiences, the cross-cultural similarity of the entities people encounter, or why so many report genuine communication and information transfer during these states. Consistency can be explained by cultural contamination and archetypal imagery hardwired into human neurology," he countered. "You don't need to invoke interdimensional entities when standard neuroscience and psychology provide adequate explanations." "Adequate if you're committed to a materialist worldview," I said. "But what if consciousness isn't produced by the brain? What if the brain is a receiver rather than a generator? That would make sleep paralysis a state where the receiver is picking up signals from frequencies it normally filters out. That would explain everything we observe far better than the current model." Dr. Holloway's face reddened. "That's not science. That's unfalsifiable mysticism dressed up in scientific language. Consciousness is an emergent property of neural complexity. We have mountains of evidence showing correlation between brain activity and conscious experience. Your model doesn't explain anything, it just adds unnecessary metaphysical assumptions." "And your model," I responded, "doesn't explain why people under general anesthesia, with effectively no measurable brain activity, sometimes have vivid conscious experiences. It doesn't explain terminal lucidity, where Alzheimer's patients with severely damaged brains suddenly become clear and conscious in their final moments. It doesn't explain the consistency of near-death experiences across cultures. Your model works beautifully for many things, Dr. Holloway, but it has glaring gaps. And sleep paralysis is one of those gaps." The argument went back and forth, neither of us convincing the other, which was entirely predictable. The materialist paradigm wasn't going to be overturned by arguments at a conference. It would only shift when enough people had direct experiences that couldn't be explained by the standard model, and when those people were willing to trust their experience over the pronouncements of scientific authority. After the panel, a young woman approached me, nervous and tearful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've had sleep paralysis since I was a teenager. The doctors gave me medications that made me feel numb and disconnected but didn't stop the episodes. What you said, about it being a doorway rather than a pathology, that's the first thing that's ever made sense to me. Can you tell me more?" And that, I realized, was the real work. Not convincing skeptical scientists, but helping the people who were actually suffering, who knew in their bones that something more was happening than brain chemistry could explain. It's been 3 years now since my first conscious contact with the Watcher. My life has transformed in ways I never imagined possible. Sleep paralysis is no longer something I fear, it's something I embrace. I enter the in-between consciously several times a week, communicating with various entities, including the Watcher who has become something like a teacher and guide. I've learned to discern between different types of beings, the observers who are neutral and curious, the helpers who actively support human consciousness evolution, and yes, the predators who feed on fear. I've learned techniques for protection, for maintaining sovereignty in consciousness, for navigating the threshold states with skill and awareness. And I've helped hundreds of others make the same journey. People find me through articles, through Marcus's network, through word of mouth among those who experience threshold states. Some are ready to fully embrace this understanding. Others just need to know they're not crazy, that what they're experiencing is real and that they have some measure of control over it. The scientific establishment remains largely hostile or dismissive, which is frustrating but expected. Paradigm shifts don't happen through logical argument. They happen through accumulation of experiences that the old paradigm can't explain. As more people have conscious threshold experiences, as more learn to navigate the in-between, the materialist model will eventually crack. But the real reason I'm sharing this story isn't to convince skeptics or to argue with scientists. It's to reach the people who know, the ones who have experienced sleep paralysis and sensed that it was more than just a brain glitch. The ones who have seen the shadow figures and felt the presence of something genuinely other. The ones who have been told by doctors and therapists that it's all just hallucination, but who can't quite believe that explanation. If that's you, if you've experienced sleep paralysis and it felt too real, too consistent, too purposeful to be random neural misfiring, then trust that feeling. You're not crazy. You're not making it up. You're experiencing a genuine phenomenon that exists at the threshold between physical and non-physical reality. And more than that, you have power over these experiences. The terror you feel is partially cultivated by certain entities, yes, but it's also largely self-generated, a conditioned response based on the belief that you're helpless. You're not helpless. You're a conscious being temporarily experiencing paralysis, and consciousness is primary. Matter, including your body, follows consciousness, not the other way around. Learn to remain calm during sleep paralysis. Practice observing without fear. Set intentions before sleep for conscious awareness during threshold states. And if you encounter entities, don't automatically assume they are hostile. Many are simply curious. Some can teach you things about the nature of reality that will expand your understanding beyond anything conventional science can offer. Will this be easy? No. It requires consistent practice, mental discipline, and the courage to trust your direct experience over established scientific authority. But it's possible. I've done it. Marcus has done it. Hundreds of others have done it. And if you're experiencing sleep paralysis regularly, you're already being given an opportunity that many people never get, the chance to consciously experience the multidimensional nature of your existence. The in-between is real. The entities are real. Consciousness is far more vast and strange than our current scientific models acknowledge. And sleep paralysis, properly understood, is not a curse but a gift, an invitation to expand beyond the limited frequency of physical reality and discover what you truly are. You are not a body that happens to have consciousness. You are consciousness that has temporarily taken form in a body. And sleep paralysis is one of the moments when you can directly experience that truth. The visitors are waiting, not to harm you, but to communicate with you, if you're ready to perceive them clearly. The in-between is accessible to you, not through chance or pathology, but through conscious intention and practice. The choice is yours. You can continue seeing sleep paralysis as a medical condition to be medicated away, or you can see it as a doorway to be consciously walked through. You can continue living in the comfortable prison of materialist assumptions, or you can take the terrifying and exhilarating step of discovering what consciousness really is. I can't make that choice for you. No one can. But I can tell you that on the other side of fear, on the other side of conditioning, on the other side of everything you've been taught about the nature of reality, there is something extraordinary waiting to be discovered. The visitors explained sleep paralysis to me. But more importantly, they showed me what I really am, what we all really are. And once you see that truth, once you experience it directly, your entire existence transforms. Sleep paralysis wasn't what I thought. It was never what any of us thought. And that's exactly why it matters so profoundly. Let me tell you about the specific changes that happened in my daily life after learning to navigate the in-between consciously. These weren't mystical transformations or supernatural powers. They were subtle but profound shifts in how I experienced reality. First, my intuition became dramatically stronger. I'd always dismissed gut feelings as random neural noise, but after understanding consciousness as primary, I realized intuition was information coming from non-physical awareness. I started trusting these feelings, and my life became easier. I'd know who was calling before checking my phone. I'd sense when someone was being dishonest. I'd feel drawn to specific places or choices that turned out to be exactly right. Second, my dreams became lucid more frequently. Once you learn to maintain awareness during sleep paralysis, that skill transfers to regular dreaming. I found myself becoming conscious within dreams, able to explore, to ask questions, to receive information. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness became permeable in ways I'd never experienced before. Third, and perhaps most surprisingly, my physical health improved dramatically. The chronic back pain I'd suffered for years diminished. My energy levels increased. I slept better, ironically, despite deliberately entering states that used to terrify me. It was as if releasing the fear and trauma around sleep paralysis freed up energy my body had been using to maintain that stress response. But the most profound change was psychological. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't fear death. Not because I became reckless, but because I'd directly experienced consciousness existing independent of my physical body. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was more than this physical form. That knowing erased the existential anxiety I'd carried since childhood. These changes aren't unique to me. Everyone I've worked with who learns to consciously navigate the in-between reports similar transformations. Enhanced intuition, improved health, reduced fear, stronger sense of purpose. It's as if learning to navigate threshold states unlocks capacities that were always there but dormant. Now, I need to address something crucial that I haven't emphasized enough. Not every entity in the in-between is benevolent, and not every threshold experience should be pursued without proper preparation and guidance. I mentioned fear feeders earlier, but let me be more specific about the warning signs that you're encountering something genuinely hostile rather than just neutral or curious. Hostile entities have specific characteristics. They provoke intense, overwhelming terror that feels different from the natural fear response to paralysis. They often appear as grotesque, deliberately frightening forms, constantly shifting and designed to maximize your fear response. Most importantly, they persist even when you maintain calm awareness, continuing to attempt to provoke fear through various means. If you encounter an entity like this, there are specific protection techniques. The most important is maintaining your center, remembering that you are consciousness, not the body, and that fear is the only thing that gives these entities power over you. Visualize yourself surrounded by protective light or energy. Firmly state, mentally or verbally if you can, that you do not consent to this interaction and that the entity must leave. Set the intention to return to normal waking consciousness or to shift to a different threshold state. But here's what's critical. If you're experiencing sleep paralysis with hostile entities regularly, and if simple calming techniques aren't helping, seek guidance from someone experienced in navigating these states. Don't try to tough it out alone. Marcus and I, and others in our network, are available specifically because some situations require experienced help. Also understand that certain mental health conditions, particularly psychosis and severe dissociative disorders, can complicate threshold state navigation. If you have a diagnosed psychiatric condition, work with both a mental health professional and someone experienced in consciousness work. Don't abandon conventional mental health care, integrate it with this deeper understanding. The in-between is real, but it's not automatically safe for everyone at every stage of development. Approach it with respect, with preparation, and with humility. The goal isn't to have the most extreme experiences, it's to expand consciousness in healthy, integrated ways. The Watcher once told me something that I think about constantly. Your species is in the birth canal of a new way of being. The contractions are intensifying. The passage is narrow and frightening. But on the other side is a form of existence you can barely imagine. What did it mean? After 3 years of communication and observation, I think I finally understand. Humanity is transitioning from unconscious to conscious multidimensionality. For most of human history, we've experienced multiple dimensions of reality, dreams, intuitions, mystical experiences, but we've done so unconsciously, without understanding or control. We've dismissed these experiences as imagination, as brain chemistry, as anything except what they actually are, consciousness operating at different frequencies. But now, as the Watcher explained, the frequency of threshold experiences is accelerating across the entire species. More people having sleep paralysis, more reporting near-death experiences, more experiencing spontaneous mystical states. This isn't random. It's not pathology. It's evolution. We're learning to consciously navigate the multidimensional nature of our existence. And as more individuals learn this, it creates a morphic field, a pattern that makes it easier for others to learn. Every person who masters conscious navigation of the in-between makes the path clearer for those who follow. What will this mean for humanity? Imagine a species that can consciously access information from non-physical dimensions. That can communicate across vast distances through consciousness alone. That understands death not as annihilation but as transition to a different frequency of existence. That recognizes all consciousness as fundamentally interconnected. This isn't science fiction. This is the natural next step in human evolution. And threshold experiences like sleep paralysis are the training ground. They're not comfortable, they're not always pleasant, but they're preparing us for conscious existence across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The materialist paradigm that has dominated Western thought for centuries is cracking. Not because it's wrong about everything, it's brilliantly successful at describing physical mechanisms, but because it's incomplete. It can't explain consciousness, and as more people directly experience consciousness operating independent of the brain, the limitations of materialism become undeniable. What comes next? A new paradigm that integrates scientific rigor with direct consciousness experience. A worldview that acknowledges physical reality without being limited to physical reality. A humanity that remembers what it really is, consciousness exploring itself through infinite forms and experiences. Sleep paralysis is just one doorway. There are many others. But for those of us who experience it regularly, we're being given an opportunity, a chance to be pioneers in this consciousness evolution. To learn the skills, to develop the understanding, to become the bridges between the old paradigm and the new. The visitors watch with great interest because they've seen this transition happen with other species across the cosmos. Some species successfully navigate this evolution and emerge as conscious multidimensional civilizations. Others get stuck, trapped in materialism until they destroy themselves or stagnate. Which path will humanity take? That's being decided right now, by individuals making the choice to expand their consciousness, to trust their direct experiences, to navigate the in-between with courage and awareness. You're part of that choice, whether you realize it or not. Every time you experience sleep paralysis, you're standing at a crossroads. You can see it as pathology to be medicated away, or as an invitation to conscious expansion. The choice you make matters, not just for you, but for the entire species' evolution. The visitors are waiting. The in-between is accessible. The future is being born through experiences exactly like yours. What will you choose?